Okay, morning everybody. Shavua Tov. We're going to dedicate this year to a refuah shlema to Jeff Jacobs, who is poorly in hospital, and we hope they'll be back with us very soon and restored to good health. Yeshua Leib Mordechai Ben something or other, can't remember off the top of my head his Jewish name, but Kodesh Baruch Hu will know who we mean when we dedicate this shiur to his refuah shlema, and to anybody else, of course, who needs a refuah shlema. Right, after 9 weeks, we will finally finish the Shimshon story today. Nobody can accuse us of not doing this thoroughly. 9 weeks to do the Shimshon story. You'll understand by the way we've learnt this that I am not a great fan of Daf Hayomi. The fact that we are about 6 months into our Gemara shir, for those of you that join it, and we're on page 5, will tell you everything you need to know about the way I think that we should be tackling our learning. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot which says you don't have to finish the job. It's not for you to finish the job, but nor are you free to neglect it. It's not our job to finish everything, to learn everything, but it is our job to try and learn something. And I am a firm believer in, if you're going to do it properly. So I know that some people have been a bit frustrated with the pace that we've gone at with this story. But nevertheless, that's the way I like to do it. And I hope that most of you at least have appreciated that. You keep coming back, so I guess you must do, otherwise you've got nothing else to do, I suppose. But we're going to get to the end of the story today. Oh, Philip's here. Should we let him in? What do you think, everyone? Give me the thumbs up if you think I should let Philip in. Oh, Philip, all right. We'll have to tell him that. Oh, no, Leon said no. It's too late, Leon. I've let him in now. Okay. Morning, Philip. You can't speak because you're muted. Okay, so yeah, we're going to get to the end of the story today of the Shimshon story. Marcel Glaski very kindly sent me a piece of something or other. I'm not sure where it's from. He can tell us that in a minute. Let me just share my screen with you for a moment because it's interesting. It's from, what book is it from there, Marcel? What is it?
It's from Traditions, A Treasury of Traditions by Norman Lamb and Walter Wurzberger.
Ah, Norman Lamb. Okay, Norman Lamb was president of Yeshiva University, an absolute star of modern orthodoxy, a pillar of modern orthodoxy in America, one of the foremost pupils of Rav Soloveitchik. He passed away, Norman Lamb passed away about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Ravi Doe wrote a very nice article in Hebrew on him. Ravi Doe was a big fan, as am I, of Rabbi Norman Lamb. His sermons were very famous. He made them into books, and many people have used his sermons for their teachings and for their learnings. Rabbi Norman Lamb was a great man. And it's very fitting that we're still in his Shloshim. I'm sure we're still in his Shloshim. It's very fitting that Marcel has found this from his book. I'm just going to share the screen with you now. I hope you can see that. Can you see? Give me the thumbs up if you can see that on my screen. Okay, you probably can't read it because it's a bit small. Let me try and make it a bit bigger. What this is saying here, at the top of this page here, is that there is a concept in biblical stories which we see repeating itself over, and in fact this is something which we ourselves in our shiur have spoken about, and that is the idea of the honey trap, of the beautiful woman and the weak man who follows his desires and comes a cropper. And if you look at the top there, just underneath the top red line that Marcel's put in for us, beauty, uncouth and unrefined but irresistible, seducing man and contributing to his downfall, emerges in the biblical arena for the first time, according to the Midrash quoted by Nachmanides, that's the Ramban, in the person of Na'amah. Na'amah, the word Na'amah, Na'im Ma'od, you've heard that expression, nice to meet you, you say Na'im Ma'od. Na'im means pleasant or nice. The sister of Tubal Cain, this is right in the beginning of Bereshit, beginning of Sefer Bereshit in Sedra Noach. And then it goes on to give the idea that this is something here, the sons of the mighty yielded to the hedonic urge and were unable to discipline their actions. They were a non-confronted, non-normative group. They worshipped beauty and succumbed to its overwhelming impact. So let me just open the way to let them all in. All these latecomers. There we go. And then it goes on to say, Na'amah, the incarnation of unhallowed and unsublimated beauty, is for the Midrash not so much an individual as an idea. Not only a real person, that doesn't mean that it isn't a real person, it means it's not only a real person, but also, where are we now? But a symbol of unredeemed beauty. As such, he appears in the biblical drama in many guises. At times, her name is Delilah, seducing Samson. At other times, she called Tamar, of course, who had the story with the Yehuda, etc. So that was very interesting. Thank you for that, Marcel. And yes, Marcel, tell us about it.
She's also, they say that she was also the wife of Noah.
Yes, up here it says that, yeah. Naamah, that was the first time we see her. Naamah, the sister of Tubal Cain, also the wife of Noah. Yeah, did you write that in, Marcel?
I wrote that in.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's very interesting. Thank you for that. I'm going to share a different. Can you see the Shoftim now on the screen? Yeah. Okay. So that was very interesting. Even more interesting that was from Norman Lamb. Thank you. So, where did we leave it? We left it that finally Delilah nagged him to death, and Shimshon gave up his secret. Right at the end of last week's shiur, we spoke very briefly about why he would have done such a thing. I quoted you Rabbi Winkler from this book, who suggested that perhaps he'd had enough he was tired of the battle. Elisheva said that she felt that he wanted to get caught. He'd had enough of the battle, and he actually wanted to be restrained from doing these things, which is often what we see with people who are not able to restrain themselves, as clearly Shimshon was not able to restrain himself entirely. And whatever the reason was, he gave up the secret. And then we have to really think, we only just touched on it last week, but we need to really think about this story, which is very peculiar. Because if you read the story at first glance, it seems that the strength that he had was actually to do with his hair. And if he cut his hair, he didn't have any strength. Now, clearly, that can't be the top and bottom of it, because this is Tanakh we're talking about. We're not reading fairy stories here. Why should it be that his hair should hold the secret to his strength? And all the Meforshim speak about the idea that whilst he hadn't cut his hair, even if he had done certain things of his Nazirut, which he shouldn't have done, then at least in terms of not cutting his hair, he still recognized that there was the Nazirut, this Nazirite condition from the womb, and whilst he hadn't cut the hair, he remained in the service of God. And by having his hair cut, as it were, then he demonstrated that he had, if you like, given up on God. I found that a little bit difficult at first because, of course, he didn't cut his own hair. His hair was cut without his knowledge. He was asleep. or in a state of post-coital exhaustion, whichever way you want to paint it. But either way, he did not cut his hair. He did not ask for his hair to be cut. So if you're going to say that the cutting of his hair demonstrated a cutting of the tie with Hashem, I find that a little bit harsh on Shimshon. You could then argue that, well, if he really meant so much to him, then he wouldn't have given up the secret to Delilah, because he knew what Delilah was trying to do. He wasn't stupid. She'd already told him 3 times. She'd already asked him 3 times. He'd already told her Bubba Mises 3 times, and she'd done whatever it is that he told him. So he knew she was going to cut his hair. So you could argue that the fact that he told her at all is the demonstration of the weakening of his link with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But I think whichever way you paint it, you have to say that the cutting of the hair was symbolic of that, if you like, nituk, that disengagement from his role as the savior of Israel, which, of course, if you remember, was told to his mother right before he was born that he was going to be the beginning of the savior against the Pelishtim. So he loses his strength, and let's go from, where's Leon? Hey, where are you, Leon? There you are. Could you unmute yourself, Leon? And let's go from verse 19, just to give us a little bit of context.
She lulled him to sleep on her knees, and she called over the man and had him shave, excuse me, and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head, thus beginning to afflict him, and his strength departed from him. She said, "Philistines are upon you, Samson." He awoke from his sleep and said to himself, "I will go out to fight like every other time and arouse myself." But he did not know that Hashem had departed from him.
Okay, let's stop there. Do you think there's any significance? Yes, Johnny, go on.
I was just going to say what I mentioned to you last week about Reb Steinsaltz says that he most probably had no one to speak to. He didn't know where he got his strength from. And if he'd known it had come from his hair, for definite, he most probably wouldn't have told her.
Okay, let's just read exactly what Rav Steinsaltz wrote here, because it's you did mention that last week, and it's right what he's written. I'll read it out here. He told her his whole heart. Samson apparently loved Delilah, as he had consulted with and perhaps even lived with her. I think that's obviously true, because if he didn't, he would have done a runner as the first time she tried to pull a fast one on him. We already said that he put up with it for 3 times and she nagged him to death. So he obviously did have some kind of strong feelings for her. Despite the fact that he probably realized that this strange love affair was not in his best interest. He'd have to be stupid not to realize that after what had gone on. Furthermore, it is possible that Samson did not know for certain that shaving his hair would rob him of his remarkable strength. Like others who prophesied without preparation, Samson received a gift from God in the form of superhuman strength that coursed within him. Conceivably, he had no one to ask about the source of his strength. Had he known with certainty what was likely to happen, he presumably would have been more careful not to reveal his secret. And I think that is a very, very good point. And therefore is in mitigation to Samson. He will have been told by his parent, by his mother, that he had to be a Nazir, which included not cutting his hair, not drinking wine, not becoming matameh to dead people. Well, we know that he was matameh to dead people. He had dead people all around him. He kept killing them. So he definitely went against that one. As far as the wine's concerned, we don't find anywhere explicitly where it says he broke that vow. And certainly the implication is that he had never had his hair cut. So it could well be that Rav Steinsaltz has pointed out there a very perceptive point that he didn't really know. I was going to ask this: is there any significance to the fact that they shaved off 7 locks of his head? Any suggestions as to what that's referring to? Yes, Morris. Morris, unmute yourself, Morris. Yeah.
Throughout the Torah and other commentaries, other writings, the number 7 has been a very prominent number in our faith, going all the way back from the 7 weeks into Shavuot, 7 days of the creation, with 6 plus Shabbat, of course, within Shemesh. So there's something about 7 that's very prominent.
Yeah.
It can mean all kinds of things, including strength. Me being a Freemason, it's also a very prominent number in the craft of Freemason, as Marcel would know.
I'm sure you're not allowed to tell us that, Morris. Okay, yeah, 7 is a very prominent number. Yeah, anybody else want to suggest anything on number 7? On the number 7, why 7 locks of his hair? Yes, Hilary.
7 is they say is the natural phenomenon, like 7 days. 6 days God created the world, and on the 7th he rested. What's the date? What's the number for more than
8?
like,
8. 8 is Me'al HaTeva. That's what. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Faye.
7 means complete.
Yeah.
7 means complete. So I think in this case they're saying 7 locks of his hair means they basically cut his whole head.
I think I agree with Faye there. 1 second, Philip. I'll come to you 1 sec. I think that's right, Faye. 7 is completion. 7 days of the week, 7 years of Shemitah, 7 lots of Shemitah till we get to the Yovel, the Jubilee. 7 is the completion. 7 sticks of the menorah, 7 branches of the menorah. 7 is the number of completion. It's also, as Hilary said, 7 is the number of nature, which is why you have a Brit Milah on the 8th day after you have completed 1 complete cycle. The 8 is the number Me'al HaTeva, over nature. So I think that the number 7 here, I think Faye is right. I think it denotes completion, and I think they gave him a Lawrence Bruce. Yes, Philip.
Wait a minute. Am I muted?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
7 is also a number which is, in general, the total amount of movements and activities that a person can do without losing the vein of things. After that, over 7, he will have to go back to 0 again, because he won't be able to do more than 7.
Okay. Yeah. Did anybody understand that? No. Okay. Doesn't matter. Right. Okay. So 7. You'll have to explain it to us again, Philip, later on. So 7 is a completion. So I think that there's indications here that he was completely shorn, and also. This is, I think, the idea of completion, that this was, if you like, this was the end of the story. We're coming up to the end of the story here. Leon, where are you?
I'm here.
There you are. Right.
Yes.
Carry on. Verse 21.
Yeah. The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him in copper fetters. He was made to grind grain in prison.
Let's stop there. Let's stop there. Just verse 21. So the Plishtim seized him. They gouged out his eyes. I mean, obviously, I was going to say to you, why do you think they did that? Well, obviously, they did that so he couldn't see. And if he's blinded, then obviously he's not going to be much of a danger to them. But specifically, the commentators speak about this. About why he had his eyes gouged out, why that specific punishment. They could have chopped his arms off, or his legs, or they could have disabled him in some other way. but they chose to gouge his eyes out. Any suggestions as to why that was the punishment that he received? Michael?
Maybe, oh, I'm unmuted. Maybe it's because when he first set eyes on the Philistine woman, he was captivated by her. So it was his eyes that led him astray.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The Mefarshim, many of the Mefarshim say that because he allowed his eyes to lead him astray, then his eyes were the organ of his punishment. On the basis of that, he could also have suffered a bobbit, couldn't he, really? But the Tanakh has not told us about that. It's told us about his eyes. And you will be familiar with this. You'll have heard this before. V'haya lachem letzitzit, u're'item oto, u'zchartem et kol mitzvos Adonai, v'asitem otam, v'lo taturu acharei levavchem, v'acharei einechem, asher atem zonim achareihem. Now, you'll all have heard that before because it's in the parsha of Tzitzit. And it translated means, and you shall have tzitzit, and you shall see them, and you shall remember all the mitzvot of Hashem, and you shall do them, and you shall not stray after your heart and after your eyes, which zonim achareihem, which lead you to prostitute yourself after them. So in other words, what the Shema is telling us is that we have two organs, if you like, in our body which cause us to go astray: the heart and the eyes. And it tells us clearly, do not stray, lo taturu, do not stray, do not go off the path and follow your eyes. Don't follow your heart and don't follow your eyes. And if anybody in the history of Tanakh failed on that particular score so spectacularly, it was Shimshon, who strayed apparently after his heart and after his eyes, as we saw from Rabbi Lamb's thing earlier on. He strayed after that on several occasions, and so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it were, arranged a midah keneged midah, a measure for measure punishment, and it was his eyes that were gouged out. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting in this pasuk as well, I don't know if any of you noticed it. Somebody, I think it was Howard Epstein, who I don't actually see here today. I don't know if he's here. Can't see him. But he has pointed out on a few occasions over the last 9 weeks that the Plishtim were people who were working with iron. They were the first people to have iron tools and iron weapons. And what we find here is vaya asruhu banachushtaim. They bound him up with copper chains. Now, I don't know, anybody interested in metallurgy? What's stronger, copper or iron? Anybody know? Marcel, I bet you know that.
Iron, of course.
Copper's very soft metal.
Yeah, so iron is much stronger, right?
Yes.
So I wonder why the Plishtim, who knew how to work with iron, I wonder why they used copper chains here. It just struck me as being odd, and I only actually noticed it just now when Leon read it out. Anybody want to make any suggestions? Stanley, unmute yourself, please.
Because to make a chain, at that time, Plishtim, they were good in iron, but iron mostly was, like a straight flat, like swords and all this weaponry. But iron, to make a chain, it's quite complicated technology. And
right.
Copper was softer and it much more useful, and more people knew much more how to use copper. That's why probably chain was copper.
Right. So in other words, what you're saying is that they knew how to make sort of flat iron things like spears and what have you. But to actually make a chain with round things was more complicated, and they didn't quite have the technology yet. Could be. Good answer. Yes. Paul, yes, what would you like to say?
My translation says bronze, not copper. I want to say.
Well, I don't know about that. Nechoshet, which is clearly the root of this word, in the Torah is always translated as copper. In the Beit HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, they made the copper kior, the laver, it's made out of nechoshet. The snake that Moshe Rabbeinu made, which is, I think if you look in, it'd be interesting. What translation is that you've got there, Paul?
This is the living Nach.
That's Rabbi Ariel Levine, is it?
Johnny Steinfeld.
Yaakov Elman.
Well,
interesting, because I think if you were to look in just about every translation I've seen of the Torah, where it uses the word nechoshet, it's used as copper. So that's interesting. Yes, Johnny Halpern.
I agree, nechoshet, copper, it was I've always learned, but Steinfeld calls it bronze as well.
Really? How interesting. Let's have
But the question is that the bronze and copper is a very close material. It's bronze, made from copper with adding more soft metals like lead. I mean,
so what you're saying, so Stanley, are you saying that bronze is a mixture of copper and anything else?
Yes.
Yeah, copper and tin.
Copper and what, Paul?
Tin, I believe.
Yeah, tin. Yeah,
tin.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway,
Bronze is definitely stronger than copper.
Bronze is stronger than copper, presumably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not so
it may be that bronze in biblical Hebrew, bronze and copper is used in the same word as nechoshet, and the reason that it's translated as copper in the Torah is because it would have been pure copper used in the Beit HaMikdash or in the Mishkan, and for mirrors and for the snake, but because it needed to be strong, then it had to be adulterated with something else to make it into bronze to make it stronger. Okay, that's great. That's really interesting. I think that certainly I've learned something there. Morris, you want to say something before we move on?
I think there might be a little, a real story significance here, because after his locks had been shorn from his head, he figuratively became so weak that the Philistines reckoned that even copper chains would restrain him.
Right, that's exactly what I thought.
I think that probably is more so than all the other explanations, because iron is iron, you know, bronze is bronze, but when they put on copper chains, that means this guy is so weak that even copper chains will restrain him.
Right. I have to be honest, that is what I thought. That's what came into my head. Marcel's nodding as well. He also thought that. Very good. Yeah, I thought that. It was. You could almost see it being a demonstration, a public demonstration of the humiliation of Shimshon. That, you know, even a rubbish copper chain can restrain him. It did help that he'd had his eyes gouged out, of course. So either way, so that's interesting. Let's move on. Leon, let's carry on, see what happens.
The hair of his head began to sprout after he had been shaven. The governors of the Philistines gathered to make a great sacrifice unto their god Dagon, and for a celebration. They said, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand."
Let's just stop there for a second, Leon. Stop there for a second. First of all, we forgot to mention the grinding in the prison house. It's a very famous image. I tried to find one earlier this morning, but I got sidetracked onto something else. I wanted to show you an image. There are very famous images of Samson in the prison house, chained up, walking around, grinding in a mill. The ultimate degradation of Shimshon. Why was it the ultimate degradation? Because what usually was used to grind in these things, to grind millstones, were donkeys. So what they were saying by chaining up Shimshon and making him walk round in a circle and grind the grain was that you have now stooped to the level of a donkey. You're nothing more than an ass. And again, this is the symbolism of degradation, that the once fearful and strong Shimshon, who had terrorized the Plishtim, was now reduced to the level of a mere donkey grinding grain. So that's the symbolism there. The symbolism here, and that fits with the copper chains that Morris has just said here. So the symbolism here of the copper chains and the grinding is the absolute degradation, how the mighty are fallen. Shimshon is now right at the bottom of the pile. Now, this always struck me as being really stupid. The hair of his head began to grow after he was shaven. Everybody knows that your hair grows after you shave. These people had been told that the secret of his strength was in his hair, right? Now, we know that the secret of his strength came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and nothing to do with his hair. The hair was only the symbol of his Nizirut. But they didn't know that. They'd been told by Delilah, who had been told by Shimshon himself, that the secret of his strength was his hair. How stupid did these people have to be not to keep on shaving him every day to make sure that his strength didn't come back? So I've never really been able to understand that verse 22, that they allowed his hair to be shaven. I suppose the only explanation, and it's not a very satisfactory explanation, it's the only one I can think of, I'll be grateful if anybody comes up with anything better, is that they were being arrogant here now, and they thought, we've done it, we've got him, we've chained him up, we've gouged his eyes out, he's no longer a threat to us, and we don't need to worry. Yes, Paul, come on, help me out. So unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have. It's just, not mine, it's the commentaries I got. More quickly than the Philistine, grew more quickly than they anticipated, according to the Malbim. But the Abarbanel says it's nothing to do with his hair growing, it's just that Hashem gave him his strength back. So it wasn't the hair at all, it was the red herring that you originally suggested.
Of course it was the red herring. We all know that we all know, because we've read the story and we know the whole background, that it was Hashem that gave him the strength. But if you put yourself in the Plishtim's position, I'm sure that you and everybody else here would make sure that he had his head shaved every morning. We'd send Lawrence round and he could do the job. Anyway, that just struck me as being interesting. And I did wonder whether, this was a demonstration of their arrogance, because we're going to see their arrogance next in the next two psukim. Leon.
Hey, I have something.
Oh, hang on. Somebody speaking?
Yeah.
Nechama, yes.
Yeah. Maybe they say here that his hair grew because they wanted to show that really, when later on what is going on, that he destroys himself and them, that he should have known that if he wouldn't have given the secret of his hair, of being a Nazir, it wouldn't have happened. And if his hair would have cut down by the Plishtim, he wouldn't have been able to do it. It is just a symbol for Shimshon, that you see, now your hair grew, now you have the guts to go and tell the boy to bring you to the walls, and now you will see, if you wouldn't have given this secret, you wouldn't have done this stupidity, you wouldn't have had been in this situation.
So, am I understanding
I
you
disagree.
correctly?
I disagree.
Who's disagreeing?
Hillary.
Hang on a sec, Hillary. I want to disagree first. No, I don't want to disagree. I want to try and understand what Nechama's saying first. Are you saying, Nechama, that, as it were, Hashem made it so that they didn't shave him, so that he would understand that he had the strength? And in other words, that it was Hashem's way of telling Shimshon that he now had the strength to go and battle again. Is that what you're saying? I can't hear you. Unmute yourself. Unmute. Say that again, Nechama, please.
Yeah, he gave him the one-time chance to do again the destruction of the Philistines.
Right, but why did it? Why did the
he connects it to they're growing hair.
I
that is
understand that. I
symbol.
understand that. But why did the Pelishtim not shave him?
Oh, the Plishtim were stupid.
Oh, okay, fine. The Pelishtim was stupid.
We-
Okay, we're out that. That's we've got to that bit. Right, Hillary, go on.
No, pretty much that's what I was going to say, that it was God's way of showing not just Shimshon, but the Philistines, that it was nothing to do with his hair. It was actually from God.
No, you see, that doesn't make sense to me, Hillary, because if that was the
Why?
case, I'll tell you why, because if that was the case, then his strength would come back without his hair growing, and everybody would have known it wasn't the hair, it was Hashem.
Right.
But the fact that
That's
his hair
what I'm trying to
grew,
say.
the fact that his hair grew almost shows that it was the hair.
Right. I agree.
I think it was incidental that his hair grew. I think it was just a ruse. I don't think it was anything to do with his hair. I think it all came from Hashem.
Well, of course it did, but the fact that
But
the
he's
hair
making-
grew must demonstrate to the Plishtim that it was the hair.
Yeah, but why would he be? Why would he
I
be?
think that was more to demonstrate to Delilah that she
okay.
thought she'd
Out of
beaten
the picture.
Johnny?
him.
Okay, hang on. Let me just take everybody in order now. First of all, Michael
Hey,
and then
Johnny?
Faye. Well, Faye,
Yeah,
1 second. Michael first. Michael Krause first.
Maybe as far as they were concerned, is the hair was now irrelevant because once he was blinded, he couldn't actually attack them anyway because
Right,
he
so
wouldn't know where to go.
So it was an arrogance on their part then, really.
Not even, but that they would realise that if you're blind, however strong you are, how can you attack anybody? You
Okay,
can't see
fair
what you're
comment.
doing.
Fair comment. Yes, Faye. Fair comment. Faye. Unmute, Faye. Unmute.
Okay, 1 second. Okay. So the Me'am Loaz explains that although his Nazarite status had been violated, since Shimshon repented and prayed with all his heart, Hashem restored his strength. But wait a minute. Then the Malbim says, why did they not shave it right? Because immediately, because he prayed, his hair grew immediately before the Philistines expected to shave it again.
Right. I think that's what somebody said before, that it grew. I think it was Paul, I think, that said it, that it grew faster than expected. Okay. So that was the Malbim. Okay. That's good. Anybody else? Okay. That was interesting. Okay. That was all very, very worthwhile. Okay. Let's see. Oh, Dagon. I want to talk to you about Dagon. Last week, Philip said that when I showed you the Cecil B. DeMille clip, and they said that they were going to celebrate to Dagon, Philip said, no, it wasn't Dagon, it was Baal. And as you can see, Philip, it was not Baal, it was Dagon. Baal was the Canaanite god. Dagon was not a Canaanite god. Dagon was a different god. It was it was a god that was from...
Fish god.
From where?
Fish god.
A fish god, yes.
They
Dagon.
were seafaring people, the Philistines.
The
like
seafaring
Greeks.
people, Dagon. But it was also the earth god, and it was the god of grain. Now, where do we know in Hebrew, where do we see the connection between Dagon and the earth god? You'll have said it this morning. Okay, v'natati metar artzachem, v'ito yore umalkosh, v'asafta deganacha, v'tiroshcha v'yitzarecha. Said, there's a picture, Marcel's showing you a picture of the fish god there. It's like a male mermaid with the bottom half of a fish and the top half of a person. But in the Shema we say, I will give you your rain in its time in the land, the first rains, the later rains, and you shall gather in Daganacha, your Dagan. Dagan in Hebrew means grain. Grain. That means the 5 types of grain. The word in Hebrew Dagan is grain. And the god of the earth, of produce, back in the pagan lot, was called Dagon, and that was the god of the Plishtim. The picture that Marcel showed us there, and what Morris said that it was the fish god, obviously comes from the idea of the Hebrew word dag, which means fish. As Morris said, the Plishtim came from seafaring people. They weren't. Well, what's the word? They weren't people. What's the word that begins with I? The people that live in that place. I've lost the word. The people that lived in that place, they weren't from there.
Indigenous.
Thank you. Indigenous. I couldn't think of the word. They were not indigenous to Eretz Israel. They came from outside. They were seafaring people. So it made sense.
Native. Indigenous is the same as native.
Native, yeah, but it doesn't begin with an I. So they weren't indigenous people. They were seafaring people. It makes sense that their god was a fish god, and Dagan was the earth god as well. So verse 23 onwards, Leon.
The governors of the Philistines gathered to make a great sacrifice unto their god Dagon, and for a celebration. They said, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand." The people saw him and praised their God, for they said, "Our God has delivered into our hand our enemy and the destroyer of our land, the one who increased the numbers of our slain." It happened when their heart became merry that they said, "Summon Samson and let him entertain us." They summoned Samson from the prison, and he sported before them. They stood him between the pillars.
Okay, let's just stop there for a second. So they're obviously making a big party here in the we know the story in the big temple there, and we see this very commonly, that big parties in temples have great significance. We see it at the beginning of Megillat Esther, when Achashverosh makes a big party. Many of the Meforshim say that that big party was to celebrate the fact that the prediction of a 70-year exile and then a return to the land of the Jews had expired, and they hadn't gone back to the land, and therefore he made a big party to celebrate that. I find that a difficult explanation because the timings don't really fit in too well, and there would have been lots of reasons why Achashverosh would have made a party, but nevertheless it was very clear that the way people celebrated, or peoples, as with a large P, celebrated, was to make lavish parties. We also see a parallel with Achashverosh's party, because in those days they had cabaret, same as we have in our parties. Yeah, Vashti was the cabaret in Achashverosh's party, and here they want Shimshon to come and be the entertainment. They're going to bring Shimshon in his chains, and he's going to flounder around because he can't see, and everybody's going to laugh at him, and everybody's going to make fun of him, and that is how they got their kicks. And so that's what they asked him to do. They stood him between the pillars, and they stood him between the pillars because he needed to have some kind of point of reference of where he was. Verse 26.
Samson said to the boy who was holding his hand, "Let go of me, and let me touch the pillars that the building rests upon, so that I may lean on them." Now the building was full of men and women, and all the governors of the Philistines were there. And on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson's sport.
Okay, let's stop there for a sec. So those were the people up in the gods, the top row of the theatre there. The cheap tickets were on the roof. There were 3,000 of them on the roof, and there were a whole bunch of them. All the knackers there were in the stalls at the front and the royal boxes, and the 3,000 people were up there watching the show. The idea of the Tanakh is painting this picture of this very significant event where all the locals are around. And then, of course, we come to verse 28.
Samson called out to Hashem and said, "My Lord Hashem Elohim, remember me and strengthen me just this one time, O God, and I will exact vengeance from the Philistines for one of my 2 eyes."
Okay, let's just stop there because this is a very, very important pasuk. Vayikra Shimshon el Hashem. So here we see Shimshon calling out to Hashem. Only one other time in his life do we see him calling out to Hashem, and that was when he was very thirsty after he'd killed a whole bunch of people with his jawbone of the ass. He calls out to Hashem and said, "What was the point of me killing all these people if you're going to let me die by thirst?" And Hashem gave him the miraculous water. We read about it last week or the week before. So here we see him calling out to Hashem. Here we see Shimshon. This is not something that he's going to save his life. On the contrary, he knows exactly what he's about to do, and he calls out to Hashem. He recognizes the source of his strength. Rav Winkler, in his book, said about last week's episode that maybe Shimshon had got to the stage where actually he believed that the strength was his and not from Hashem. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't at that point. But here, it quite clearly is recognized by Shimshon that his strength comes from Hashem. And he says, Adonai Elohim. He gives him his full title, Hashem Elohim, and uses the word Elohim, which is the word to denote God as judge. God as judge. He's asking here for judgment against these people. And he says, Zachreini na, remember me, please. V'chazkeini na, and strengthen me, please. Ach hapam hazeh, just this once.
Johnny?
Yes.
Right, why did he only want to be avenged for one of his eyes and not both of them?
Coming to that in one moment. Well, maybe not one moment, but coming to it, okay? Be patient. Okay? I've got something to show you first before we get to that bit. So he says, remember me and strengthen me, please. Achapam hazeh, just this once. Ha'elohim, again, he uses the word Hashem's name. Va'inakma nekam achat mishtei inai. I will avenge myself for just one of my 2 eyes. Mi plishtim, from the plishtim. Okay,
I understand it differently. It says, and I will take revenge one time for my both eyes.
Okay.
From my both eyes. One time I'll take revenge on them for my both eyes.
Okay, so that's one of the explanations that for Dave is that actually it wasn't one eye. He was going to say, I'm going to take one massive revenge now for my 2 eyes. The other explanations and the reason why actually
wrong explanation, translation. It's a wrong translation.
If we are going to translate this accurately, Nechama is right. The Hebrew is translated correctly the way Nechama said it. Sorry, Dave?
It also makes more sense that he's having one against both eyes. It doesn't make sense.
Right. So the correct translation is, literal translation is the way Nechama has said it. If you have a look at my screen, where my pointer is, you can see that the word Nekam is connected to the word Achat. Nekam Achat, one vengeance. if you want to read it the way Leon translated it from the Art Scroll, you got Art Scroll, Leon, yeah?
Yes, yes.
And let's see what Steinsaltz says. Hang on, over the page. Steinsaltz
Two eyes.
says,
Two eyes.
Steinsaltz says,
One vengeance from two eyes.
Steinsaltz says, one ultimate vengeance for my two eyes. So Steinsaltz says like Nechama, and Art Scroll and Chabad say like we've got here. 1 second, Hilary, I'll come to you in a moment. So let's the Steinsaltz and what have you got there, Nechama? I think it's probably in my Amloe. She's got there. The translation in the Steinsaltz and what Nechama said is correct literally and makes more sense, as Dave has said, and is grammatically correct. Now, the reason that the Art Scroll and the Chabad translation translate it the way they do is to give a more spiritual angle on it for Shimshon. Because what they say is that he says, I want vengeance for my one eye. And I will, but if I had vengeance for my two eyes, that means that I wouldn't have anything left in the bank, as it were, for my olam haba, for my world to come. I don't want to give up my entire world to come for vengeance in this world. So that's why they translate it the way they do. It's not a literal translation. It's not a correct translation, but it is giving a more spiritual slant, if you like, on what Shimshon is saying. And of course, that is consistent with the Art Scroll approach and with the Chabad approach. Yes, Hilary?
I think more importantly than this is the difference between revenge and vengeance, from the point of view that this is saying that he's doing it for a personal reason, but surely it was Hashem who told him, who gave him the mission to destroy the Philistines in the first place. And this is basically what he's got the opportunity to do now, or most of them. But it's almost saying that he's doing this for his own reward. Are you with me?
I'm very with you. Yes. Okay. Let me just park that for a minute, because I want to just play you something, and then we will summarize, including what we've just said. But let's just first of all finish the last two verses, Leon.
Samson said, no, sorry. Samson
Right.
grasped the two central pillars upon which the building rested, and he leaned on them, one with his right hand and one with his left hand. Samson said, let my soul die with the Philistines. He leaned with force, and the building collapsed on the governors and on all the people inside it. The dead whom he killed at his own death were more than he had killed in his lifetime. His brothers and all his father's household came and carried him away. They brought him up and buried him between Zoreah and Eshtaol in the burial plot of Manoach, his father. He had judged Israel for 20 years.
Okay, so you'll remember that I told you that Shimshon became a symbol of Jewish defiance and Jewish acts of aggression, really. It became a symbol of the hard right settler movement, and in particular it became a symbol of the Jewish Defense League, and their anthem, the Jewish Defense League anthem, was this pasuk. Zachreni na, listen to the words carefully. Zachreni na, remember me now, please. Strengthen me now, please. Just this once, and I will take vengeance for my eyes from the Plishtim. And here it is. Let me just check. I just want to hang on a second before I share it with you. I want to make sure you can hear it. Here we go. I hope you'll be able to hear this. Here
Nice rock song to jive on.
All right. So I don't know. You were probably all watching that that video very carefully, but I was not watching that video because I've seen it a few times. I was watching Nachum. Nachum had the biggest smile on his face that you can ever imagine.
Me too. I actually heard him speak many, many times in America.
So Nachum is a big fan.
I'm a very big fan. And he was the most dynamic speaker I had ever heard. And every time he spoke, he stimulated every Jew sitting there that this was the right place for the Jews to live and to come here. He was amazing, just amazing.
Okay, so and I'm absolutely certain that there are people here. There's one particular person who I can only see the top of her head who will not be overly thrilled with that video. But let me tell you.
You are so right.
Okay, and that is the beauty of our wonderful community. Let me tell you one thing. I promise you that no Maggid Shir in Ponovitch Yeshiva has ever shown that video. Okay, so you are definitely privileged to have seen that video, whether you agree with it or not, in a Shoftim Shir. Now, I wanted to show you that video because I wanted to visualize what I told you before, and that is that the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, presents itself as a very strong and vengeful group who are not going to take any kind of nonsense from anybody. The idea that Jews would go like lambs to the slaughter is not their thing. The opposite. Interestingly, I was looking up in Wikipedia. According to the Anti-Defamation League, the JDL consists of only thugs and hooligans. Okay, so that may be the case. But either way, that's one sec, Marcel, I'll come to you. What I wanted to stress to you is that the JDL, Rav Kahana, Baruch Goldstein, all those very, very far right-wing people, they had Shimshon as their hero, and they took Shimshon's last plea to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as their anthem. And that, I remember from where it must be about 25 years ago, I think, when that came out. Maybe it came out earlier than that. It's when I first got to hear that thing. My kids were teenagers, younger than teenagers maybe. And all the tough Jewish kids in the area, all those that like to scrap, they were singing that at the top of their voices. They loved that because they like to be thought of as tough and not sort of the meek Jew who was not going to take revenge for when things happen to them. So I wanted to just connect that with the Shimshon. And Marcel, and then I'm going to do a summary of the Shimshon story. Marcel.
Yes, Jonathan, just look at your WhatsApp. I sent you a picture of Shimshon pulling down the pillars.
Let's have a look. There we go. There we go. There's a good picture. Let me just admit, David. There we go. Well, there's a nice picture. Where's that from, Marcel?
It's from a book called Tanakh B'Tmunot.
Tanakh in pictures. Very nice. Lovely. There's a nice picture for you guys. Shimshon pulling down the thingies. Right. Okay. So let's do a summary after 9 weeks of doing Shimshon. Since I'm the one with the microphone here, I'm going to give you my summary. You're all entitled to agree or disagree to a whatever level you want, because that's the beauty of Tanakh. Tanakh is there for us to learn from. I see Shimshon as a flawed character. I'm going to come to what Hillary was saying in a second. Hillary said, and I'm going to start with this. Hillary said that we see from this last bit that Shimshon says, "Let me take vengeance for my eyes," that it was a selfish sort of idea that he had in his mind. It was for his own benefit. That's how I see Shimshon from the beginning. all the battles that he sees. I know Paul doesn't agree with me, and we'll perhaps get Paul to give his summary in a minute, but I see Shimshon as a flawed character. He didn't ask for this mission. He was born into this mission. It wasn't something that he took on willingly. He was, if he even knew about his mission, I don't even know if he knew about his mission to begin to deal with the Plishtim. It was all personal for him, certainly at the beginning. We then see Shimshon mature in that he does not react in the volatile way that he does. We saw that in the last chapter. He matures into an adult who is able to control himself, at least in terms of his violence against the Plishtim. We do see Shimshon, we see glimpses of Shimshon being true to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't by any means see Shimshon as a totally negative character. I see him as a symbol of somebody with great strength who doesn't quite manage to target that strength in 100% the correct way. I see him as somebody who does have a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but is weak in terms of his ability to resist the charms of beautiful women. Who can blame him for that, I guess? He was a human being. He wasn't given this job willingly, but he did stick to his Nizirut. We don't see him sticking to his Nizirut with death, but we do see him sticking with his Nizirut with his hair and with his grapes and wine. So I see him as a very complex character. But more than anything, I see him as a symbol of, and this is how Rabbi Winkler in that book that I showed you before sees it too, I see him as a reflection of a terribly poor standard of the times of Bnei Israel. They were subjugated to the Plishtim. They were willing to be subjugated to the Plishtim. They said to Shimshon, don't you know that the Plishtim rule over us? What are you starting with them for? We just want to keep our heads down and don't want to be disturbed. And Shimshon was disturbing them. He was stirring up the hornet's nest. For that reason alone, he was chosen as the symbol of the hero of the JDL. So I see Shimshon as the leader of a people who were downtrodden, who were very poor in their spirituality. They didn't even cry out to Hashem for a savior. We saw the whole thing in Shoftim. They were at a very low ebb, and as we've said many times, Iftach b'doro k'shmuel b'doro. The generation gets the leader it deserves. The leader, as it were, gets the generation it deserves. So that's my summary of Shimshon. I see him as a tragic character. He's a loner. We don't ever see that he gets kavod from his people. We do find that he judged for 20 years. That's true to say. And so maybe that's not fair to say he doesn't get kavod. He was made into the judge for 20 years. But we don't actually see him happy. I don't think we ever see a happy Shimshon. We see an angry Shimshon. We see a downcast Shimshon. We see a nagged to death Shimshon. And at the end, we see a desperately brave Shimshon. But I don't think we ever see a happy Shimshon. I see him as a tragic character. I see him as a character who is full of flaws, but ultimately somebody who is at the end of his life true to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and true to his mission. But I see him as a reflection of a very poor tkufa, a very poor period of time in the Jewish people. I want to invite Paul now to shoot that down to bits.
I don't know about to bits, but he had a mission. His mission was to start the campaign, the freeing of the yoke of the Plishtim, not to end it, not to completely get rid of them. He did exactly that. Throughout his life, he judged for 20 years, you said, and he finished up by getting rid of all of their leadership. You know, pretty successful demonstration of carrying out one's role in life, I thought.
Okay, all right. I think that was a very adequate defence of Shimshon. Jeffrey Glasky.
It talks at the end about his brothers. Now, I actually thought he was an only child. The whole purpose of him, of being a Nazirite, was he was the only child. It was like a gift from God.
Okay, very good question, Jeffrey.
At the end of the story, he's got brothers.
Very good question. Johnny Halpin, would you like to answer that question, please, from the bottom of the page? You'll have to unmute yourself first, Johnny.
Okay, this is Rabbi Steinsal's explanation. Although Samson's mother has been barren, it is possible that after Samson's birth, she was blessed with additional children. The same was true in the case of Samuel, whose birth story parallels that of Samson's in many ways. There too, Samuel's once barren mother gave birth to more children after him.
Okay, there you go, Jeffrey. I also asked the same question, so did Rav Steinsaltz. I had a different thought about it, which I'll just add to, and that is that his brothers and the entire household of his father went down and picked him up and brought him up. At the end of the day, and I'm going to use this as a support for my theory, at the end of the day, who was it that went down to pick him up when he'd done that act? His own brothers, his own family went down. We don't see that in all the other Shoftim, we don't see that it was their family who buried him. We say that he was buried in such and such a place, indicating that the people buried him. Here, the Tanakh points out that it was his brothers and his father's household. And I, in support of my theory, is that Shimshon was not a particularly popular leader, and it was left to his brothers and his household to go and do the dirty work and go and bury him. Paul's not having it, but there you go. Anybody else want to give a summary of the Shimshon story before we finally put it to bed? Nachum.
Yeah, I think that it's a story that men should take to heart, that they're very susceptible to evil women, and they should make sure that they don't fall under the spell of the kind of rotten woman this was. And I'm really surprised that some of the women that are watching this program for so long have never raised this issue. What a rotten bunch of women destroyed him. Just destroyed him.
I see it differently, I'm sorry.
Come on, Nechama, what do you think?
I see that he is a typical, it's the second person in the Torah that we know that went after his eyes. It means going after what he saw, a beautiful woman. Who else saw a beautiful woman on the roof? Was King David. And he went into trouble with this. He had the prophet come and scold him, and he asked for forgiveness and da-da-da-da. And here Shimshon went also after beautiful women who were foreigners, who were not from his people. He went after his eyes. And the whole story there goes around the eyes and the hair. You know, the hair, King Avshalom had long curly hair and was fixing his hair, and he got hung on a tree.
Yosef HaTzadik also had hair. Okay, that was really interesting. For me, that was really interesting. 1 second, Johnny. Really interesting. And I'll tell you why I think that was so interesting. I'm sure many of you will have read the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. You can see a few nodding. Those that haven't read it, it's a great book. It basically tells you, anybody that tells you that men and women are the same are completely off their heads. They're completely different human beings. Here we have Nachum blaming the beautiful women for enticing the poor fellow. And we have Nechama saying, that stupid man can't keep his trousers on, and Helen's nodding away there at that point. So there you have it. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Leon, you've been waiting patiently. Leon.
Yes, I was thinking that there must be some significance in the fact that Samson never vowed Nazirut. His mother did it for him. I think you mentioned that it was he was unwilling.
Yeah, I mean, I said he didn't take it on willingly. We don't actually see him. Normally, a Nazir has to make an oath of Nazirut. as you say, he did it. It was forced. It was foisted upon him.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Philip, go on. Then Philip, and then Hilary, and then Derek.
You talked about Baruch Goldstein before. I don't think we should compare Shimshon to Baruch Goldstein. Baruch Goldstein was a seriously psychologically injured, wounded person because of the experiences that he'd had taking care of wounded soldiers in the army. And he went off on his own bat. Shimshon was actually representing, I think, the children of Israel when he did what he did, even though, as it was said, that he was influenced by evil women. He was still representing his people much more than Baruch Goldstein was.
Okay, I'm not going to make any kind of defense of Baruch Goldstein. I don't think what he did was right at all. So let it not be said that I compared Shimshon to Baruch Goldstein. What I said was the Baruch Goldstein supporters used Shimshon as their hero. However, I don't agree with what Philip has just said. I think I agree with what Hilary said. I don't think that he did do what he did for his people. I think he did it for himself. But there you go. Hilary, and then Derek, and then we'll call it a day.
I don't remember exactly who it was, but surely there's something in the women thing, because weren't we meant to kill everyone? And they didn't. They spared the women, and the women lured the men into, where was it? The women were enticing the men to come to.
Yeah, I think you've got a couple of stories mixed up there, Hilary. We were meant to kill all of Amalek. We went to kill all of Amalek, and we didn't kill Agag, and who wasn't a woman. But you're right. In next week's Sedra, in next week's Sedra, we'll see about the story of in the Sedra of Balak. We'll see that not next week's Sedra, the story of Balak. We'll see the story where the women enticed those poor, unsuspecting, poor Nebuch men who couldn't keep their eyes off things and couldn't.
And that's always the weakness. You take Tamar, the woman who was married to somebody's son, and he kept being promised the other son.
Tamar and Yehuda,
It's always a matter of the woman who causes the downfall of the man, unfortunately.
Okay, Johnny Halpin, and then
sorry, Hilary, I have to say something, Hilary.
Johnny Halpin.
It tells you at the end of chapter 15, he judged Israel during the days of the Philistines for 20 years. And it says he was a great savior and very well respected there. And I think it's important to note that this chapter, we've just finished the whole story of him, reminds you again that he judged Israel for 20 years. He was a good guy as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's no.
They wouldn't mention it twice if it wasn't.
Okay, good point. Good point. Derek, where's Derek gone? There he is. Okay, unmute yourself, Derek, please. Unmute. We can't hear you. There we go. No, now you've muted again. Unmute. No. Unmute. There.
I'm unmute.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just saying that winners write the history, and also all these stories are written by men, not by the women. I think it'd be a different story if it was written by women.
That is a very good point. Two very good points. History is written from the vantage point of the victor, and of course, these stories were all written by men. I would like to give the last word on Shimshon to Helen Rosen. Come on, Helen. You've been very quiet. Come on, Helen.
Look, I agree with you. He was a very flawed character, which is why I'm amazed that the JDL actually think that he is somebody to look up to. But okay, leave that aside for one moment. The thing that has really incensed me this morning started with the piece from Rabbi Lan and has continued with the discussion about how wicked women are and how they tempt the poor defenseless men who have no minds of their own. I can only use their eyes or whatever. And it goes from Eve all the way down to women being put behind the chitzas and having to dress in a different way. And it's a stereotype that you find going all the way through all the generations, and this illustrates it as well.
Right,
So
thank you, Helen. I promised you, everyone, this was not staged at all, but it gives me an opportunity to encourage you that once our Techelet website is up and running, one of our things is going to be to encourage women to take their rightful place in Judaism within the bounds of halakha, and to exactly try and undo some of the injustices that we see around not in the Torah itself, but in the way the Torah is interpreted by the men. And I think what Derek said is absolutely right. We have to remember that the Torah is written by men, unfortunately for men. But we are doing our best to try and bring the women in and to try and encourage a more inclusive approach within the bounds of halakha. That is very important. Okay, we've gone way over time as usual, but I think we've definitely done the Shimshon story justice. And next week we will start on a new chapter where the Bnei Yisrael sink to ever deeper depths. Shavua Tov to everyone.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, everybody.
Shavua Tov.